anyone that knows me knows that I have a particular fondness for the niche sword and sorcery / fantasy epic adventure movies that took particular prominence for about half a decade, from the early 1980s to the mid 1980s. Now the film that I've picked this week could be at once called the last dying gasp of that genre, released as it was in technically Christmas 85 in Europe and January 86 in the US. And if you discount Willow, of course, made a few years later, and I like to. At the same time, it's completely unique and separate from all its relatives. For all of those other films, be they Conan, Krull, Deathstalker, Ladyhawk, The Sword and the Sorcerer, even Your Hunter of the Future, regardless of their budget or their quality, they arrived on the screen as they were always intended to be, completely unmolested. And our film this week, Ridley Scott's Legend, was released theatrically both in the US and Europe in two completely different versions, followed about 20 years later by a final official director's cut on DVD. Now, when I say there are 3 official studio and director sanctioned versions of this film lying about, I am talking different practically on a Superman 2 scale. I mean, the different versions of Legend are completely different films. You look at them on the surface and it seems like, how can that be? It's the same story, it's the same look, it's the same footage, right? Well, there are a lot of elements which come into play regarding how different the versions are. In fact, if I were to teach a film studies class and, I was to show you an example to the students of the power of film editing, I'd choose this film. And in order to discuss it with you tonight, we do have to talk about the different versions and the differences between them. But there are other reasons to choose Legend for me. Being a Ridley Scott film, of course, there is so much more to talk about here visually and thematically than there would be with anything else in the genre. It's also one of the prominent films of my childhood, one that I remember above most, and features one particular character that I found so terrifying as a child that he invaded most of my nightmares and cemented himself to me as my personal favourite movie villain of all time. The story of Legend, and actually we're getting into the differences right here because in the US version, they use the oldest trick in the book and they give you an opening narration scroll which flat out tells you what the story is. The director's cut just starts the damn movie. Now the story takes place in a completely undefined magical time, land and place, totally detached from any sort of logical or historical context, as any classic fairy tale story should be. The story starts when the fair Princess Lily, played by Mia Sara, who every day escapes from her boring life at court to visit this magical forest where one of her suitors, but the only one she seems to care for, Jack, played by Tom Cruise, lives. A boy truly one at nature. He knows every inch of the forest, he talks to the animals, he's friends with the other creatures that live there like the elves and the fairies, and he also knows the rules of the place, and one of them is to never touch the unicorns, the most sacred of animals, who hold the power of light itself. But he's a naive chump who gets easily seduced by Lily and will do anything to please her. So, Jack takes Lily to see the unicorns, unaware that the forces of darkness are ready to make their move against the unicorns, and they just need some foolish mortals to show them where the steeds are. So when one of the 2 unicorns in the forest is hunted down and has its horn, known as an alicorn, hacked off, which throws the forest and seemingly the world, although we're not quite sure, into perpetual winter and night. All the Lord of Darkness, played with bedwetting awesomeness by Tim Curry, needs to do is kill the other unicorn, and then sunlight will be extinguished forever, allowing him to leave the confines of his lair and, all together now, take over the world. Now, here's where we get into the differences again. In the director's cut, it's clear that the first unicorn has been killed and can't come back, and all our heroes can do now is make sure that the last unicorn doesn't end up the same way. In the US cut, again, because you people can't cope with unhappy endings, all they need to do is get the alicorn back and reattach it to the unicorn's head, and it'll bring it back to life. Regardless anyway, Jack allies himself with the other magical creatures of the land to go on a quest into Darkness's lair to rescue the last unicorn, and Princess Lily as well, who the Lord of Darkness now fancies will make a good wife for him.
I mean, Curry is great, but I mean, Mia Sara is the movie, in my opinion. That's the character, as any really good story. It's like, a character has to go through a change, and she's the one who goes through the change in the movie. She starts off nice, sweet, innocent, not innocent, but young with a little bit of an edge. And she kind of knows how to play Jack's emotions, and she loves him, but she knows how to get what she wants, and she knows how to get what she wants out of darkness in order to get to the ending of this movie.
With Jack and Lily, you truly have an Adam and Eve situation. Now, I always thought it was odd how, with the exception of that farmer's wife Lily meets at the start, there isn't a single other human being in the story. And I've always wondered if the film would have gained anything by showing us a little of Lily's world that she escapes from, that we're only told about and can only imagine with the boring...
She's either a lady or a princess, depending on which version you're watching.
One of your visits is always a pleasure.
A royal visit's always a pleasure.
It's time you started behaving like the lady you are.
It's time you started behaving like the princess you are.
True enough. Well, for argument's sake, we're going to say she's a princess because we've all seen the director's cut. But the whole point of the story, to me, is that Jack and Lily should feel like the only two people in the world, like Adam and Eve. They've been put down on this earth, this magical land. They've been given the entire world to themselves, with no expectation of them except that they respect its laws. And like any flawed human being, they fuck it up. They fuck up paradise for themselves. Jack wants to be sure he can get Lily's love, so he tries to buy it by giving her everything she wants, and she knows it, and showing her the unicorns. In itself, showing her the unicorns is forbidden, it's implied. And Lily, even seeing them isn't enough for her. She wants to touch them. And in the moment that she does, you're seeing the beginnings of her corruption, the beginnings of her journey. And as you say, it's Lily's story. She has the journey. Her one sin turns the world to darkness, and she sets about putting it right, but once she actually confronts darkness, his logic is very plain. This whole mess is your fault. You can't set it right. Your soul is not as pure as you thought. You have an evil seed inside you. It will do you better to just embrace it and stay with me rather than go back to your old life and pretend this never happened. And I actually thought about it only just as I was rewatching it. Maybe I'm looking at this too deeply, but there's actually a wonderful Catholic allegory going on here, because obviously the idea of original sin, as Catholicism has it, is that we're all born on this earth sinful because of what Adam and Eve did, and this is Legend's world's version of that, the birth of original sin.
Well, it's certainly the Adam and Eve thing, because you see the US theatrical version, and it's funny, again, you see the big differences. If you see the director's cut, it's just kind of they don't really do anything, but they're clearly in love with each other, but in a doughy-eyed kind of Walt Disney way. You see the U.S. version, and it flat out tells you they fuck in the woods. It does.
That's why I love talking about these things with you, Jamie. I mean, you just say things that Ridley Scott wouldn't say on the director's cut. See this bit here? They're fucking in the woods. That's what they're doing.
It's true, though. It tells you to your face, like, she goes to the woods to get laid.
Like I say, this whole Catholic thing, maybe I'm stretching it too far, but I think that the film would reverberate for any kid brought up in a Catholic school who was taught by a strict nun. Or Christian maybe, but especially Catholic, because in that type of situation you are told that if you commit another sin, you'll be sent straight to hell. And that's exactly what happens to these characters. They make one mistake and they go to hell. It's weird how it works that way. I think that the greatest strength of the film is that it beautifully shows the purest expressions of light and good with the forest and the unicorns and young love, and certainly the purest expression of evil. They don't call him Satan in the film, but that's what he is.
Yeah.
And Ridley Scott doesn't fall into what I think would be a trap of other filmmakers, perhaps, of trying to create a hell that went against people's expectations. No. We imagine hell, certainly as children, exactly as it is, exactly as Ridley Scott makes it in this film. It's a huge underground type cavernous place with pits of fire all around, and the devil is the scariest thing you have ever seen. I have delayed this for far too long. Let us talk about Darkness himself. Of all the characters in the film, he is the least damaged by the different versions. Most of his scenes remain intact across all of the different cuts. As such, people who've seen the film always comment that he's the most memorable character. It's not entirely fair to say that. in some ways, and in some ways it is. I'd like to think that he wasn't cut so much because even the filmmakers in the studio knew, regardless of whatever other problems the film seemed to have, Tim Curry's performance is not one of them. First of all, I think it is hands down the best makeup job and the best makeup performance I have ever seen. They talk about in the making of the great Rob Bottin, one of the best in the biz, especially at that time in the 80s, was called on to create a character that would be made up head to toe completely in makeup and prosthetics, which is quite rare, obviously, for reasons of time and money. But there isn't a single shot in this film, if you look at it, where they're cheating us with darkness, or with any of the other makeup performances, really. There isn't a single bit where he's just wearing a head and shoulders piece and right out of frame he's wearing a t-shirt. No, he's fully in it the whole time. And
just one thing real quick there. There are certain shots, though, it's not Tim Curry, it's a guy in a mask.
True enough.
I mean, that's noticeable. Like the particular shot where he has flames come out of his fingers, that's so not Tim Curry.
I have to say, even though I had issues with the film, darkness is the only thing in this film that I had no problem with whatsoever. He's pretty much the only reason to watch this movie, and like you said about the makeup, I was really, really impressed by his performance, because having been a fan of Guillermo del Toro for a long time, I've seen a lot of movies like Hellboy and Pan's Labyrinth and watched the behind-the-scenes stuff on the DVDs where they talk about the process of putting makeup on these people and how difficult it is to emote through all of that rubber and makeup and latex and contacts and effects work and all of that. And for this performance to come across as naturally as it does, considering the fact that he looks so absurd with those huge horns coming out of his head and the teeth and the contacts and all of this, for it to feel so natural and so right, it's a real testament to Tim Curry's abilities as an actor that I like that character so much, and that the makeup did not distract me. I mean, the first time I looked at him, I thought, what the hell is this? But after 10 seconds, you completely forget that he's wearing makeup, and that's just him.
It's so much better in the director's cut, where we don't see darkness until like 40 minutes into the movie. Like that scene where the head goblin, Blix, comes in and they go over the plan, and you only see his hand. Mm-hmm. And like you see the U.S. version, and he's basking in what appears to be the rays of a blue moon, and his eyes are glowing, and his fingers are glowing, and it's creepy, but it kind of takes away from the like holy shit when he shows up in about an hour into the movie.
I have mixed feelings about that. You're absolutely right. It is very interesting in the different versions how he is introduced. As far as his appearance, he has this sort of dark grey skin. At first, I thought it was just a lighting effect, but I'm wondering if the idea might be that he's been stuck in exile so long and has been powerless for so long that his skin has actually turned grey, like the sun and light is slowly killing him. I'm not quite sure. It's interesting. But anyway, we know what he looks like, as you say, so his big entrance later coming out the mirror. It's still cool, actually, because, first of all, it's a great entrance, but secondly, we see him finally in his proper red form. And
we get a full body shot of him in that shot. When he kneels over to pick her up, like we see his hoofs, or whatever you want to call it.
Getting back to the actual performance, I mean, I think it's a transformative performance. I mean, look, never mind Tim Curry today, but let's just take a look at a film he made fairly close to legend, Clue, where he played the butler. Now, do this at home, kids. Take a look at Clue. Take a look at regular 80s Tim Curry and that, with his funny face and his quiffy hair and his great comic timing, and then look at Legend. Dear God, can you even fathom that it's the same guy? And I can't even imagine how hard it must have been to deliver a performance in that. As Christina says, every possible handicap is put on Tim Curry in this film. He's covered head to toe in prosthetics. He has these ginormous horns attached to his head, which, as light as they were, they might have made him a little dizzy. He's got false teeth in his mouth for those Dracula fangs. He's got contact lenses, which reportedly were very painful. And because Darkness is a proper satire character, he's got goat hooves. And they put the guy on fucking stilts as well. So he can't see, he can't walk, his mouth is full of false teeth, he probably can't hear too well in all of that, and yet we get the performance we get, and I would argue that it's the definitive performance of his career, actually, not Rocky Horror, because Curry spent most of his career, certainly after this film, playing bad guys on film and television. Countless Saturday morning cartoon bad guys. It took, I think, the Wild Thornberrys for someone to cast him as a good guy again. I guess then, yeah, we can move on to the score now.
Oh yeah.
If you want an example of how important that single element is to a film, look no further than Legend. The film was initially scored by Jerry Goldsmith, who gave the film a very lush, high romance flavour. Too much so, Ridley Scott felt at the time, so replaced it for the US version with our old friends Tangerine Dream, who, as you would imagine, just did something completely different, much darker, more electronic, more the style of movies at the time, and it's just weird to me how that one element made the US version seem to be a darker film. And I'll tell you an interesting story about that just quickly. As I've said, I grew up with the US version. I eventually, there was one Christmas day where apparently Legend was playing on TV, and I thought, cool, I want to watch some Legend today with the family. We watched it, and the first time I was watching the European version with the completely different score. And my initial instinct as a kid was to say, the fuck is this? This isn't Legend. This is horrible. Because it's just a completely different tone. The score just makes, because if the darker it is, the cooler it is for a kid, right? You know, you don't care about it being lush and romantic. You don't care about the sweetness of it. You want it to be dark and cool. So, and also, I'm a kid of the 80s, so yeah, I like my electronic synth scores sometimes when they work. And I actually think that the score works by Tangerine Dream better at some points in the film than Goldsmith's score. Jerry shines when showing us the light of the world, the romance, the innocence, the beauty. That's where his strength has always been. By his own admission in interviews, that's what he likes to do. He likes to do lush. But I agree with Ridley that at times it's too sweet. There's no particular dark, evil music for the villains or for hell. Now, some will argue, well, do you really want the music to ram down your throat? These people are evil. Under normal circumstances, maybe not. But when it's the fucking devil, yes, absolutely, it should be as dark as it possibly can. Perfect example, in the opening where Blix the Goblin is walking through the forest to the evil tree, Goldsmith doesn't play music for him that tells us that he's evil. It's more subtle. It's more, ooh, who is this mysterious creature? With Tangerine Dream, though, you get this deep synth rumble, and you know this guy is bad news. The character is identified musically. Tangerine Dream do a better job musically conveying the threat of the goblins, like when they chase after Lily, like when she's in the house, and then all of a sudden you get this sting and they show up and like, holy shit, hide, you're a terrible danger.
But the music, I mean, not even just the music, Phil, before we get to that in a second, but the songs and the riddles are all, you know, it's like, again, the distinction with a fairy tale to which the fairy tale adventure film to what the US version is, and they're missing songs. Like, she sings in the movie. It's very much like their influences there of the Walt Disney cartoons, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and whatnot, Cinderella. The riddles aren't there. So funny, like they miss all that stuff. That stuff is great. I mean, like the Lost Fairy Dance sequence, which that's all that stuff that makes it so distinct and interesting. It's just completely bulldozed over. It's an example of the terrible editing of the U.S. version. Is the scene where he first meets Gump, and you know Gump immediately forgives him, and he says, "Oh, if it's remember he says,
I did it for Lily. I did it for love." Oh,
love.
really? All right.
Love, that's another matter, and they just immediately forgive him. And
More booze!
It's very bad cutting, and it's much better in the director's cut where he has to pay a price for that. They're like, hey, this is our world too, you fucked up, and hey, she's a human, so she doesn't know better. You're worse, because you're a human, but you're a forest kid too, so you know better. Mm-hmm. And it showed the menace of the Gump character. He's pretty creepy. But, what's the other thing? It's like, he says, how did you know my name? Well, Gump doesn't say his name in the U.S. version. It's just some very bad editing in that movie.
It's heartbreaking to watch some of it. In retrospect, I mean, I grew up with the US version, which is weird, really. You'd think I'd grown up with the European,
the European version, which is 94 minutes.
It's not true. No, the version that they showed on TV was the US version. To me, that was the only... I didn't know anything about the making the film. To me, that was the film. And obviously, I mean... I loved it. I still can't detach myself from the nostalgia of it. I mean, there's things that I prefer, actually, in the theatrical version. And I know I'm not alone. I've talked to friends over the years that feel the same way. But, hey, it probably is nostalgia, and you can't detach yourself from it. Regardless, there are some things when you watch the director's cut and then you look back, and some of it's heartbreaking because you know how much effort went into crafting these scenes. And they're essentially discarded. And I think the perfect prime example of that is the Meg Mucklebone scene, where Jack crosses the swamp into Darkness's lair, but encounters this disgusting sea witch who lives down there and wants to eat him. Now, it's a great scene to watch because, first of all, like Darkness, the makeup is amazing and, again, transformative. But it's also an important scene because it's Jack's first test of heroism to overcome. And in the director's cut, it's not a test of strength or steel, even though he's just got himself a big sword. It's a test of wits. Jack delays Meg from eating him because he compliments her on how beautiful she is, and she succumbs to her vanity. It's a ridiculous scene, really. And in theatrical cut, she literally pops up, says, "I'm gonna eat ya," and he smacks her with a sword, and it's over.
And what a fine fat boy you are, Jack!
You don't really mean to eat me, do you, ma'am?
Oh, indeed I do!
Yes, but that would be a shame, because someone as fair and lovely as yourself, Miss Meg, deserves far better than scrawny me. Don't you think?
Yeah. Think me fair? Do you, Jack?
All the heavenly angels must envy your beauty.
What a fine meal you'll make. Be the rest of you as sweet as your tongue.
Wait! Fill your soul with loveliness! Feast on the beauty of your reflection. You are an angel, Miss Meg. Look. Look!
What a splendid idea. Clever boy. What a fine cat boy you are, Jack.
You don't really mean to eat me, do you, ma'am?
Oh, indeed I
I did it!
But I think I think the biggest impact is on the ending of the film. Now, in the US and the European, actually, the good guys win, the dead unicorn is brought back to life, and Jack and Lily run off into the sunset, presumably to get married. Maybe at Hare Kingdom, although I can't see Jack fitting in, really, but that seems to be the implication. The big surprise to fans of the film, seeing the director's cut for the first time, was how different that plays. Lily awakes from her little coma, thinking everything was a dream. And Jack says nothing to dissuade her from that, although it is implied, I think, that she knows it wasn't a dream, and I can't...
She figures it out.
If there was a legend too, I mean, I think the opening scene would be in here in therapy, I'm sure of it, after everything she's been through. But regardless, Lily matures and realises her journey is complete, and realises she can't take Jack as her husband and back into her world. Just by being who she is, she brought death and destruction to the forest, so they part ways, I think, in a very melancholy way. I mean, she says she'll come back and visit him again tomorrow. Yeah. But there's a feeling left to me that they won't have that happily ever after that they have in the other versions. And it's a much more appropriate ending, because if we're sticking with the Adam and Eve theme, this is their version of being kicked out of paradise, the realization they can't be together in the way that they like. If it's a proper fairy tale, if it's a morality tale, there has to be a price that's paid. You can't just retcon everything and set everything back to the way it was, as the theatrical version does.
God.
And what's more, there's a very weird thing that happens in the last shot. Which is that they run off into the sunset, and then we cut back to darkness, laughing, implying that he's not dead at all. And now I'm kind of partial to that ending, actually, for a couple of reasons. Not just because darkness rules and I don't want him dead, but also, if you think about it, the film is about the balance between light and dark and the struggle to maintain it. Now, when the film starts, light and dark are very much in balance. Then things tip over to the dark side, obviously. Then the heroes win and vanquish darkness. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they've killed the devil and the world now only contains light, hasn't that fucked up the balance just as much? It makes more sense to me that they've only won this battle and that things reset right to the way that they were at the start of the film. Light prevails, but darkness is back in his hole, plotting his next return to power. You can't kill him. In fact, that whole death speech he has before he's sucked out into oblivion is all about that. You know what?
It does make it a little bit more sense with that shot. Well, he doesn't even give the whole speech, so that's the problem. Well, they cut the shit out of that too. Yeah. It's like if he had given the whole speech and then they show the last shot of the movie, it still would have been like, what? But it would have been like, okay, you can go back and analyze it. The whole speech he gives to Jack right before Jack cuts his arms off makes a little more sense about what you're getting at, which is true.
I think the main part of everything that we talked about is that while I love it with a passion, it is flawed, and there's no preferred cuts for me of the film. They both have their pros and their cons, and I will fight passionately for each one. The preferred cut is the one that only ever existed on paper and was never fully realised at the time, and I think it's one of the purest expressions live action I've ever seen of a classical fairy tale. We've seen a lot of live action adaptations of fairy tales, but so many of them seem to feel the need to put things in a modern context or give it some kind of kick-ass action kind of flavour. I mean, we're looking at these two Snow White remakes that are on the way, and at least one of them looks like it's going to be fucking Excalibur or something like that. But with this, no, it's a pure expression of a Grimm's fairy tale. It's a morality play, and it's one of the best examples I can think of it. Even if you don't think much of it once you've seen it, I don't think you will regret having seen Legend. So please do check it out. But check out all three versions just for me. And then tell me in the comment section how much you love Darkness.
Yes. Please.